Well, good evening, everyone. It is 6 o'clock. Can I firstly welcome everyone to this meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee this evening. Just remind people that this is being recorded and will be streamed in due course. If anyone's got a mobile phone, please can you make sure it's switched off or to silent. If you do want to speak, please raise your hand and I'll deal with those requesting to speak as and when they come up on my screen or in the chamber. So don't worry too much if you haven't got your computer. I'll give everyone the opportunity to speak. And on that note, if we can go to the agenda then, item 1 is the apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Brandon Dodd and Councillor Joe Prothero. Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth. Anyone else? No. Item 2 is declaration of interest. If you've got any, can you speak now and state what your nature of the interest is? None? Thank you very much. Item 3 of the report then is the minutes held on the meeting of the 22nd of June 2026. Can I firstly thank Nigel for chairing in my absence? Did an excellent job. So these minutes are before you for correctness only. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you. Can I have a seconder? Thank you very much. Anyone against? No. Thank you very much. Next item is item 4, the annual Treasury Management Report 25-26. Gemma?
Thank you, Chair. So this is the out-term position for Treasury Management for 25-26. So most importantly, we're reporting that we've complied with all the performance indicators in year and there haven't been any breaches. So that's, I suppose, the headline. As you know, as in last year, these indicators now also include our kind of leasing exposure as part of the introduction of the IFRS 16 standards. So where we're incurring leases on, for instance, vehicles, that's rolled up as part of our kind of liability long term as well. This primarily relates to, or does relate to, funding our capital programme. We have had an under-borrowed position for some time, so our external borrowing is less than our reported borrowing need, and this is partly off the back of our reserves position, and also, for instance, where we're holding capital grants in advance of spending them. That ability to be under-borrowed has reduced in recent years, but not as dramatically as we were projecting that it would, partly because of the capital grants position. In year, we borrowed £20.5 million as part of our capital expenditure, but also refinancing borrowing that we're paid back. So £16 million of that was borrowed from the PWLB and £3.5 million from a local authority and a further £1 million from Welsh Government for town transformation. The majority of the funding we borrowed from PWLB, so 10 million of that 16 million, related to the housing revenue account, and we have a preferential rate for the housing revenue account borrowing to support the delivery of new homes, and so they're subject to a 60 basis point deduction from the standard interest rate. So we're really keen to make sure that we borrow our HRA borrowing in time. We are trying to manage the kind of future projected trajectory of borrowing, which obviously is very uncertain in terms of those borrowing rates. So we're trying to make sure we manage our kind of laddering of borrowing over the longer term planning of the council, making sure we haven't got too much money maturing in year, but also managing that interest rate risk as well by not borrowing too much too short. Our borrowing requirement increased by 11.5 million. So we've got a total capital financing requirement of 230,634,000 at year end. And our actual gross borrowing was 181,871,000. And there's an additional 3.5 million in terms of our long-term debt liability for leasing. So as I said, well within our external borrowing limits for the authorised limit and the operational boundary. And we paid 7.5 million in interest on that external borrowing in year. In terms of investment, we had a really positive position in terms of interest income in year, and it it really helped in terms of the broader outturn position of the council. So total interest earned on investments during 25-26 was 2.3 million, which includes accrued interest. And the investment balance at year end, 31st of March 2026, was 37 million, which was an increase on the previous year. So those are the main points on the report, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Gemma, for a very comprehensive report. It's always pleasing that the council's not breached its prudential indicators or anything like that. So that's always a good position to be in. So we'll deal with questions.
Thank you very much. As I've just returned to the committee, I have just a few questions, background questions perhaps, for Gemma. Just to confirm, out of that 20.5 million that we have borrowed over the last year, how much of that is new and how much is more rearranging previous debts? What was the reason behind the borrowing of 3.5 million from a local authority other than ourselves, rather than going to the borrowing board, the Public Works Loan Board? And when you say that there was borrowing which had been reduced by 60 basis points, what are the obligations of that? Is this 0.6%? Is this 0.6% lower than the norm, lower than usual? Could you just explain a little about what 60 basis point deductions from the standard PWBL interest means to somebody without a financial background? Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of the new borrowing refinancing, I'm going to have to check that for you, Councillor Johnson, unfortunately. In terms of the HRA borrowing, so it's normally we would have the certainty rate, which is 40 basis points below. I think it's 40. So this is lower again. So there's an extra 20 basis points forever for new build houses. Oh, sorry. Like it's like a subset of the percentage. So say if we're borrowing at 3%, yeah, we would be borrowing at 2.4%. Okay. But it's to support the housing revenue account, so we have to demonstrate that it maps across and is used specifically for the housing improvement programme. As part of the certainty rate form that we fill in for PWLB, we set out what our borrowing intentions are, and we obviously have some rules in the strategy about borrowing in advance of need, so we need to make sure that they're as accurate as possible. And this is partly why you see in the unaudited accounts the HRA reserves increasing to 9 million. It's so we can use the borrowing that we've borrowed in year to support the housing revenue account, because there's been a bit of slippage and additional grants on the housing revenue account in year. In terms of the local authority borrowing, because we're borrowing in a mix of relatively short and medium term borrowing, we're not really borrowing long term at the moment, although we are starting to think about it, given how long we've been in this short term, medium term borrowing position. It was purely that it was a really good rate when compared with the PWLB, and we could borrow at a lower rate because it was a relatively short period of time that we were borrowing for. The local authority investment and borrowing market fluctuates dramatically based on how available the cash is, as well as all of the other issues. There's a big surge of people wanting to borrow at year end. So for instance, we were able to lend some money out, and we got in excess of 7% for some for an investment that we made. But similarly, at other times of year, people need to get the money out of their bank account and invest it, and we're able to get really positive rates in the market. So we do liaise with a number of brokers, and we keep an eye on that market as well as the PWLB option.
Thank you for that, Gemma. And just to confirm for Councillor Johnson, this obviously isn't the first time this report gets seen. It gets seen by us and then it goes to full council. So you will have seen it in previous years at full council. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, Chair. And of course, we bring the monitoring partway through the year as well. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Gemma. Any other questions? Matt?
Gemma, just to check, I guess it's forward-looking. I guess your strategy is the expectation that the interest rates will fall, which seems entirely reasonable. At what point, if they don't, does it in your modelling, does that become an issue?
So I think innately we are carrying interest rate risk. I mean, you just have to look at our capital programme proposals and how much we intend to borrow, particularly for HRA. So there'll always be interest rate risk. I think it's about mitigating it. So it's taking advice of the Treasury management advisors, making sure that, you know, if rates go down, that you can leverage some of that benefit, but also that we're not too exposed in terms of having to suddenly borrow because we've run out of cash and we've got to borrow at a really high rate. So, but it's not just the interest rate risk we're thinking about, it's also the laddering of those repayments as well. And that's why we have Treasury management advisors as well as just trying to work it all through ourselves to give us that a little bit of reassurance in terms of those decisions that we're making. And they often take expert advice on what they think interest rates are going to be as well. So hopefully that gives us a bit more reassurance about our position. But I think that having that longer term borrowing, that is starting to creep back into conversations because there's so much economic uncertainty out there now that we need to factor in.
Thank you for that, Gemma. Any other questions? No other questions? Any comments? No? No comments? Then if we go to the recommendation, which is at 2.1, that we accept the report and refer it to full council for final approval as required by the regulations. Someone prepared to move, please. Thank you, Ewan. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Anyone against? No, thank you very much. Item 5 of the report then, risk management and governance arrangement for major projects. I believe Charlotte's on the call.
Good evening, Chair. Thank you. This report has been put together as a result of a recommendation from a previous governance and audit meeting in February and provides an overview of the approach adopted by the project management unit within the Place Directorate to manage risk and governance when dealing with major projects, particularly regeneration projects. So for those of you that don't know, the project management unit is an internal corporate project management support service within the council responsible for delivering a wide range of land development projects. The unit supports a range of departments, including housing, social services, environment, and just to name but a few. So the report goes into detail as to how we report and manage risk and issues on a day-to-day basis, but then as and when issues arise and are escalated in line with the corporate risk management policy and governance arrangements that are put in place on a project-by-project basis. The report cross-references 2 major projects which have recently been to Cabinet, which those individual reports set out a series of, well, seek delegation and also set out a series of governance arrangements and also risks which are clearly identified within the reports, given some of the nature of those risks. And then there is a summary of how that relates back to the corporate risk summary report and the latest position on that in June this year. The recommendation for this report is set out in 2.1, and that's that the committee note the existing processes in place for the management of risk and governance in relation to major projects. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that, Charlotte. Just before we start, just a quick question from me. Obviously, the report raises the two issues, Barry making waves, levelling up fund update and the Wilco redevelopment. It refers to two reports, Cabinet report dated the 28th of May 26 and a Cabinet report dated the 11th of June 26. Is there any reason why they're not attached to the report as background papers? Because obviously we've got non-elected members of the authority and the independent members would have to go looking for these reports. They're not even mentioned in the background papers. So
sorry, Chair. Sorry, Chair. They are added as links in the background documents in the report itself. Apologies.
Okay.
In the report itself, underneath background documents at the end of the report, there's a series of links there, and it's there.
Okay.
But if anybody would like the hard copy versions or a PDF within an email, please do contact me. Happy to provide those.
Thanks, Charlotte. That's me told off, so that's okay. Thank you. Okay, are there any questions? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Charlotte. I was just noting to the chair that there was indeed a link contained within the report. I don't want to go outside of the remit of this report too much, but in considering risk and governance, I just want to raise, and perhaps this is a question you might expect since we were discussing this during the planning committee just last week. But what happens if the project changes to such an extent that it almost doesn't relate to the original proposal? Is there a point during the discussions and during the timetable of the project where you consider whether this is still going to deliver to the intended purpose? Because that is one of the discussion points that arose in the planning committee last week regarding the mole and Barry making waves. And is there a point in this process where you reconsider whether this is sincerely carrying out the work that was intended in proposal? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for that question. In terms of what happens if a project changes, that does go back to Cabinet. In the case of Barry making waves, that did go back to Cabinet as a result of ABP pulling out of that project, and it was fully reconsidered within a Cabinet report regarding that. And it all depends upon the governance structure of the particular project that is being considered, and whether there are delegations, for example, for amendments to be made. But on that particular project that you're raising, that did go back to Cabinet for consideration.
Thank you, Charlotte. Nigel?
Thank you, Chair. My question was answered. It was along a similar vein to Councillor Dr. Johnson, so I don't have anything further to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Are there any other questions? No. Are there any comments? No. If we go to the recommendations then, that we note the existing processes in place for the management of risk and governance in relation to major projects, and certainly no doubt if there are any major changes to that which go to Cabinet, then they need to be brought back to us to just to have a look at. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you, Ewan. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Anyone against? No. Thank you, Charlotte. You can leave and go elsewhere if you wish. Thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you.
Item 6 of the report then is the Audit Wales review of scrutiny arrangements. James? Is it James first? Rachel. I don't mind who deals with it first.
Would you like to deal with your element first, Rachel, and then I'm happy to.
There we are. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to do that. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. So, members, you have the report and the officer's summary report in front of you, which obviously you will have read. So I'm not going to take you through the report in a huge amount of detail. I'll just pick out some of the key points for you. So our overall finding is that the council has taken steps to strengthen its scrutiny arrangements, but the purpose and the impact of scrutiny activity isn't always clear. So that then limits how effective scrutiny can be. So let's unpack that a little bit and hopefully give you some insight into how we've come to that overall conclusion. So the first section of the report deals with roles and responsibilities. And you'll see that our finding here is that roles and responsibilities are clearly set out, but they're not always fully understood in practice. And the reasons why we came to that conclusion are set out in paragraph 9 of the Audit Wales report. And to summarise, they are that cabinet members don't always present their own reports to scrutiny committees, and questions then from the scrutiny committee do tend to be directed to officers. So in that particular instance, it's not clear how scrutiny is holding cabinet to account. Reports don't always explain what the committee's role is. And in terms of scrutiny recommendations to Cabinet, it's not always clear what the committee wants Cabinet to do or do differently. So when you take that together, that suggests to us that in practice, scrutiny's role, particularly in relation to specific reports, is not always clearly understood. And that, of course, means that scrutiny is not necessarily always setting itself up to have the impact that it could have. We don't want to overstate the issue in this section. There are some relatively simple changes that could have a positive impact here, but if you want scrutiny activity to be impactful and useful, which of course we all do, that has got to start with getting those roles and responsibilities really clear. So the next section deals with training and support. Our findings here are broadly positive. They do come with the caveat that the council hasn't yet formally evaluated whether those arrangements are effective. Now, to a certain extent, that is a timing issue in terms of when the reshaping scrutiny programme happened and when we then subsequently came in to do our work. However, our observations about roles and responsibilities that I've just been telling you about, they do suggest that there are opportunities to fine tune some of that training and support. Next section is about engaging the public. Again, findings here are positive. The council's got a range of ways for people to take part in scrutiny, and there are examples where people are taking advantage of that and they are participating. So what that means is that it is more likely that scrutiny hears a broader range of views, and ultimately that means better informed decisions for the council. The next section is about impact. Our finding here is that the impact of scrutiny isn't always clear. It links back really to the first section around roles and responsibilities. So although members are involved in selecting items for their work programmes, all of that part of it is very positive. When those items come to committee, we did see some examples where that clarity of role and purpose just wasn't there. I mean, to clarify, what we're saying is that basically, if scrutiny isn't clearly setting out what it wants to achieve, it's going to be difficult for you all to know whether it's achieved it or not. Which brings us to the last section of the report on effectiveness. So at the time of our fieldwork for this review, we could see that the council had made a number of changes, and some of those changes were clearly aimed at making scrutiny more effective. The council has further plans on how it's going to evaluate the effectiveness of scrutiny, which we acknowledge. But again, the timing of our fieldwork does mean that that evaluation is at an early stage. So the council, and therefore Audit Wales, just aren't in a position to say whether those changes are going to work. That's not a criticism, it's just where we are. We do note in the report that we think that as those evaluation arrangements develop and bed in, it'll be important to incorporate those earlier points we've been making about clarity of purpose and intended outcomes. So all of that leads us to the recommendation. It is in the Audit Wales report, and it's in your cover report as well. I'm not going to read it out to you. Essentially, that recommendation focuses on ensuring clarity about the role and purpose of scrutiny and regularly evaluating the effectiveness of scrutiny. And hopefully you'll see that that connects with the findings that I've been setting out to you. So those are our findings. I don't know, Chair, happy to take questions at this point. I don't know, Chair, if you want to go to James and have him explain the council's response to our findings. In your hands, obviously.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I think we'll allow James to respond and then allow the members then to ask relevant questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Rachel, for the overview. Just basically, just want to pass on thanks to colleagues from Audit Wales for undertaking this audit, and also the range of officers and members, as it was a substantial piece of audit work. Building upon the findings, as Rachel's outlined within the report, you'll note there is within the report itself, in Appendix B, there's the management response form, where you'll see the council's response, which will be after the summer recess, albeit with preparatory work being undertaken already. But the target dates are quite short, as we're in a strange place of wanting to embed changes with existing members as quickly as possible, with an eye on the future member population with the 2027 election on the horizon. So our approach to responding, as Rachel alluded to within her overview, in terms of lots of the areas highlighted, improvement areas highlighted, are very much interlinked, and very much lots of minor tweaks. So they include undertaking workshops and training alongside with members, alongside reviewing key council documentation, whilst also considering the constitution as appropriate to reflect any changes formally, and whilst also using this to inform the wider training and about a member induction programme for 2027. As a standard course, we'll monitor our progress in meeting these recommendations via the council's regulatory tracker on a quarterly basis. And to give some specifics in terms of the workshop sessions that we'll be looking at. So we are working with the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, a national organisation in terms of scrutiny space, just in terms of redesigning something bespoke for the Vale. I'm very conscious that as an organisation in the past 18 months of these embedding the scrutiny changes, we've undertaken we have a number of training materials available that we highlight and signpost to in sessions that we delivered through various avenues. And actually, I think at this juncture, I think it'd be really worthwhile to have an independent viewpoint to help facilitate some of this training, to also diversify our toolkit and hopefully bring some new perspectives and lenses from our local authorities beyond the Welsh landscape, which is where we traditionally tend to network and engage for best practice. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour for the response for it. I think the intention is for some short and medium term actions, noting that this existing term is until May 26 for members, with a view of any changes also informing the longer term development programme for elected members. Thank you, Chair, and happy to take any questions alongside Rachel.
Yep, thank you, James, for that. Any questions? Ewan.
Can I ask Rachel about the organisational response? I'm interested as to your thoughts if the scale of the changes proposed by management are the kind of levels that you were anticipating as coming from this report. And can I also just thank, while I'm here, the Audit Wales team, who were fantastic in engaging with councillors and members of staff regarding all of the issues regarding the scrutiny changes.
Rachel?
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I'm glad that Councillor Goodjohn found it to be a positive experience. We tried to make it as painless as possible. In terms of the question, if you look to the management response form, you'll see in the final column that is our standard response from Audit Wales about about management responses. And in this instance, you'll see we are satisfied that the council has properly considered our audit findings and recommendation. The response is sufficiently specific to give assurance that they will act on the recommendation, and timescales are acceptable, responsibilities have been allocated appropriately. We use that standard wording because under the Audit Code of Practice, that is what we are required to do, so we stick with that. In terms of whether or not we think that response will be effective in terms of addressing the recommendation. That is something that we do not comment on generally for two reasons. Well, for several reasons, but the main reasons are that it would be speculative. It's not based on, it's an opinion and it's not based on evidence. And whatever we bring to you as a committee is based on evidence. The other reason is that if we take, if it would compromise our independence when if were we to come back and do some follow-up work on this. If we'd already expressed a view on the planned actions, it would mean that we were in a difficult position then. If we said, oh, we think that's going to be good, we think that will work, and then it turned out it didn't, it puts us in a difficult position in terms of reporting on that follow-up. So that's why we don't do it. Does that respond to your query?
Forgive me,
Councillor?
I totally understand everything that you've said there, and absolutely don't want to compromise that. My question was more, is the scale of the response, whether it works or doesn't, that's a whole other matter. The response itself, doesn't in itself say exactly what's going to change. It's, is the scale of the response the kind of level that you would anticipate as coming from a report like this? Are you satisfied with it from that point of view beyond the standard wording?
I think broadly speaking, when we've done this piece of work, we've recognised that, I hope that comes across, that we recognise that the work that the council has already done in terms of its reshaping programme. When we look, the issues that we found and have reported to you on are not, are not the things that I would categorise as being fundamental flaws then in your arrangements. So you've made the decision that you're going to go down this reshaping scrutiny route. Having done that, you've decided to do it. We can see that is we can see the impacts of that are starting to come through. It's a bit early yet. So what the recommendation is trying to say is that as you continue on that road, here are some things for you to think about. If we thought that you needed to go back and fundamentally reassess what you were doing, we would have made a recommendation to that effect. Does that help, Councillor? I'm not trying to be evasive.
No, it does help. It does help, and
okay.
That's much more what I was looking for as a response. But
okay,
thank you,
great.
thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Nigel?
Hey, firstly, I want to echo Councillor Goodjohn's comments. I thought it was a really interesting and useful report, so thank you to Audit Wales for that. There is a paragraph 19 in the report, which talks about the council not always articulating the intended purpose and impact of scrutiny activity, and it goes on to say about the reports not always setting out what the purpose of scrutiny is. And I notice in the response to the recommendation 1, on page 2 or 3, it says review existing scrutiny procedural documentation, including committee reports, etc., etc. My question probably for James is there doesn't seem to be much in the response about any training for staff or how people are going to be perhaps brought up a little bit with education, or whether another word is better, to bring people up to speed on how do they make those reports better. It's something we've discussed at this committee about what is the purpose of the reports and what is the outcome that is being looked for. I don't think I saw enough of that in the response, and I was just interested in in James's response, and obviously anyone else from essentially the council in terms of responding to that element of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel, for that question. In terms of this, we're going to the committee report template point. It will be a case of a minor update to the template, which members will notice has changed very recently, but there will, as a result of that change, will likely be iterative developments based upon feedback provided so far as and when we start to embed those arrangements. So I think it ties in with that piece around when we look to make changes generally, so as part of these scrutiny changes in general, probably is slightly underplayed within the actual response itself. So our engagement is very much on a huge level just because of the sheer number of touch points that that scrutiny has. It's with both our operational managers, our report coordinators, our heads of service, senior leadership team, and also with elected members, not scrutiny committee members, scrutiny members in general, and committee and scrutiny committee members and cabinet alongside. So it's very much as part of any changes, we'll be looking to deliver an engagement plan across the piece to ensure that actually there is that understanding of them. So I think we have plans in place to, when we are making any changes to particularly key governance documentation, we'll be engaging engaging with all the relevant stakeholders to ensure that they do have a deeper level of understanding. And just to add to that point as well, in terms of our governance in general, again, probably is slightly underplayed within the report itself, but we are undertaking a piece of work in terms of actually sort of recently held a session with all project and programme managers across the council, for example, in terms of actually trying to really further their understanding of the scrutiny, in terms of moving to some of that space, in terms of actually what is the role and purpose of it, how can they advise your project management, and considering the key various elements within the project management cycle. So I think we have started that work in terms of very much probably will be taking a bit of a top-down approach a bit in terms of actually here are the changes we'd be looking to make based on best practice, and then disseminating that throughout the organisation, and then working with the various service areas and also the elected members to ensure that it's embedded accordingly. But as probably is a bit of a theme throughout this report, I think the nature of the changes and the sheer scale of them, as Councillor Goodjohn alluded to, it will take a bit of time by the sheer number of touch points that it'll have to be fully embedded and integrated within across the corporate psyche effectively. And hopefully that answers your question, Nigel.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I think, yeah, just reading it cold, it just comes across that there's probably a lot of training and work being done with scrutiny members and review of procedural documentation. There isn't really anything in their response regarding to what you just said around the work across the organisation. So I think, yeah, it's probably just understated, and that would probably add a bit of value in terms of both recording that and also tracking it. So yeah, thank you for that response.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, James. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I would like to just confirm that I do support James, and I do appreciate James's commitment to his role and his work very much. But I think that the problems that we're facing with scrutiny is something which is more basic, which is the fact that the good practice and the purpose of scrutiny differs depending on where you sit within the council. Whether you're a cabinet member, well, that's going to be a different sort of scrutiny to a backbencher, and then different again if you are from the opposing party. And so that is part of the frustration that I felt over the last few years regarding what is good scrutiny, what is good practice in scrutiny, since this looks very different. For myself personally, as a leader of a party that tends to sit upon some of the overview and support committees, I find that I understand less about the activities of the council than I did before the changes came into place. And I have also heard similar comments from the leader of the Conservative group when he raises questions during various committees. Once again, I've heard several comments over the years regarding the desire or the expectation for members of the cabinet to take responsibility over reports that come before these committees. There are one or two members of the backbench in particular who wish to have a response directly from members of the cabinet. Councillor Bruce Franks notes that he wishes to have a response from the member of cabinet, but I find it's easier to ask technical questions to members of staff, to senior members of staff, that is, who truly lead on that particular subject rather than asking the politician. So somewhere during this process, we need to have some sort of agreement and consensus on what is good scrutiny, which is the same whether you are a member of the opposing parties or you're someone who is in power at that time. Because without that agreement and that consensus, we're going round in circles, and that frustration is there for several people who are representing several parties, and they are doing this deep work without getting any answers. Now, I like doing task and finish work, and I volunteered to do several groups for the resources committee. But once again, this feels to me as if it's insignificant compared to the large amount of work that the council has, and I'm not sure it helps me quite to understand what is ongoing across the institution. So I do welcome the report, and it's a very interesting report. But once again, looking to the future, I think that a piece of work is needed to make sure that every councillor can sit behind their reports and say, yes, I have a good understanding of what we intend to do, so that we can turn up to these meetings. There's one member who has given up, doesn't go to any scrutiny meetings anymore because he just doesn't see the point of it. And his personal opinion is this, and it is something for the next term for us to consider to ensure that everybody is playing their part and playing a key part in that work. Thank you.
Was that more of a statement than a question? Okay, are there any other? Oh, James, did you want to respond?
I did, thank you, Chair. It's probably just to respond on to, thank you, Dr. Councillor Johnson, for your very salient points and your support as well. It's very muchly appreciated. I think it's probably just to draw committee's attention to probably one element, again, it's probably slightly understated within the report itself. So one of these sub-recommendations is around the role of Cabinet. So a key part of the work that would be undertaken with the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny is around actually reviewing the Cabinet and Scrutiny protocol to review how they both work effectively, noting them. Councillor Johnson, you're absolutely right in terms of mentioning around the questioning lines, where, for example, we have particular members that will direct to Cabinet, some members will direct to purely to officers, and there isn't currently an absolute consistency approach, which I think will be a challenge to reach into itself. But to note that as part of that work, we will be looking at a session around actually revising our Cabinet and Scrutiny protocol to ensure that there's buy-in, and it's something that's amicable for all parties involved within that process, so that all stakeholders are getting out of it in terms of the role and purpose that they desire to. And then just noting around the task and finish work, probably just to emphasise that I think whilst this is very much a new innovation in terms of the scale, whilst the council's previously undertaken task and finish work on a part basis, it is quite a new challenge in terms of undertaking it on a systematic basis. So I think it's just to really emphasise this. Whilst the recommendations may not always be considered straight away by Cabinet or actually be able to have a tangible impact on an immediate basis, and due to the nature of some of the topics. So, for example, because some of them are looking at quite systematic issues. So I think it's probably worth noting that whilst they may not have that immediate impact, I think it's to be anticipated that actually when future decisions are made, that they will draw upon the evidence of those tasks and finish. So whilst there's not an immediate ability to be able to say, yes, in the first year we've undertaken these task and finish groups, and this has happened as a result in terms of policy change, actually in future years, as and when policy decisions and directives are made, I think task and finish work will form a key part of the evidence base. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any other questions? No, I've just got a couple of questions. Sort of following on from what Councillor Johnson says, what role has the Democratic Services Committee played in dealing with this issue specifically? Because within their terms of reference, they are required as one of their provisions to look at scrutiny. So obviously, I don't know what, because obviously there's nothing in the report that says it, but what role have they actually played into assisting in this project? Because clearly you're discussing it with everyone, Cabinet, scrutiny committees, but I think it would be useful, it's required by law, I think, that Democratic Services need to look at this within its remit. So I'm just wondering what's been Democratic Services, and have they reported back in regards to any issues put to it? As you said, James, there's quite a lot of work being undertaken with the policy unit. Has there been any work undertaken by the WLJ in this area specifically? Because scrutiny is always a poison chalice, really, I'd say, in every authority. Clearly, we are just over 8 months away from the local government elections. Tremendous amount of work being undertaken by this authority in regards to trying to address this issue. You'll almost get there in December, and then all of a sudden there'll be lots of training, lots of activities, and then an election. And again, you start again in May 2027 in reality. So I'm just wondering what thought has been given to that. And in regards to the monitoring and review, obviously there's a monitoring and review activity to take place this year up to the end of this administration. But what monitoring and review is going to take place after? Because the end date in the planned actions is December 2027. Now you're going to have new elected representatives, you may have new officers or whatever in the authority. Is that going to be, I should imagine training will take place May, June-ish. Then we'll embed everyone in their committees. They'll need to understand very specifically what we're just raising, what their role is, what their terms of reference are, what their responsibilities and accountabilities are. And then also we're in Christmas 27. So is there going to be any monitoring after the new set of councillors that come in May 27? And finally, a question for Audit Wales Audit. Are they intending to do a follow-up piece of work, if requested by the council, to look at what actually has been put in place post the election, and to ensure that that is obviously embedded and addressing their recommendations set out in the report? Because the monitoring and review is important, but again, a fresh pair of eyes is also very essential. So I'm just wondering whether, James, you could pick up the 3 issues I've raised, and whether Rachel could pick up the final one.
Absolutely, Chair, and thank you. Some really useful points there. So on the first note around the role of Democratic Services Committee, whilst the committee doesn't have a formal responsibility for scrutiny provision, it's very much around the reviewing the adequacy of resources to discharge function and member developments. The committee have been engaged, albeit informally. So at the previous committee, we considered the annual report of the head of Democratic Services, which is statutory requirements. And within that, there was a key section around scrutiny. So in terms of reflections upon the first year, what was working well, what hasn't worked as anticipated, and what were the areas for improvement. And a few members did discuss points based upon those findings from those reports. So whilst it's not directly related to the audit report itself, Democratic Services Committee were provided with the opportunity to really reflect upon the scrutiny arrangements and provide their viewpoints at the first juncture, based upon the views of myself as head of Democratic Services, based on our own internal self-reflection. Going to your next point around WLGA, there is some work being undertaken nationally. So without jumping too far ahead to the next point, but as part of the member induction, some national work around looking at induction for members. We recognise there is no one-size-fits-all approach to scrutiny, so they have, in the last 12 months, released a self-assessment surrounding the scrutiny function for councils, and are using that as a framework for effectively force councils to effectively review their functions, identify any gaps, and then undertake some peer learnings for how we remedied it. Because myself and the other 21 heads of Democratic Services meet on a quarterly basis to discuss challenges, and as you can imagine, scrutiny is a frequent topic in this space, as it is somewhere that we'll experience challenges. I think it's probably worth also noting around at that point that we do also engage on a regional basis with Cardiff and Bridgend councils, as they're quite similar in terms of the commonality of challenges, structures and makeups, etc. So we do also have also engaged our scrutiny chairs and vice chairs group to also operate on a regional basis so that they're able to undertake some peer learning as well. And also from my officer perspective, in terms of being able to undertake some practical networking effectively in terms of what are you doing about, for example, what are you doing about this potential topic? How would you navigate this potential scenario, etc., etc. So there has been work, we do engage quite regularly at both the national and the regional level to try and inform the direction of travel within the scrutiny space. Noting your comments around member induction, you're completely right. It is, as probably Rachel alluded to within opening remarks, the timeline for the audit is a challenge, because at what point is it a good time to do, and when there's as you rightly outlined, there's an election on the horizon in May 27. But scrutiny will form a key part of our member induction programme. It's something that we are already giving thought to with the member development strategy being agreed by Democratic Services 6 weeks ago, and we'll be looking at the detail for that in terms of delivery, with that being delivered by Democratic Services Committee in November. So that'll include some of how we'll be looking to onboard members through some of the more traditional approaches, like your presentations, your understanding, etc., but also through some non-traditional approaches such as mock meetings, visits, really trying to get a look at how we can engage learning in a slightly different way. But I'll try not to go into too much detail of noting this committee's terms of reference. The regulatory report recommendations. So for the PPA, for example, they will naturally have to hand it over to new members. And as part of that, we've already undertaken election planning arrangements, and with a key part of that being the induction process and effectively ensuring there's a secure transition of governance. So in terms of the monitoring review for the first year, I completely recognise your points. There'll be a challenge in terms of the first year in particular, in reflecting upon actually with spend a large chunk of the year trying to get people to understand what scrutiny is, let alone ask them around the so what and the actual fundamental impact of it. But we'll be working in terms of, we'll be undertaking monitoring and review through both the scrutiny annual report, through our recommendations tracker, and also through our member surveys, etc. So we'll be really working to understand, actually, on an ongoing basis, I think, members, particularly any overlapping members of the Democratic Services Committee, particularly be aware in terms of there's very much an ongoing commitment to that continuous learning piece, whether it be for our annual member survey, our annual reports, and also looking at the reflective practice piece of individual committees themselves in terms of that in-year learning as well, in terms of trying to understand, did we achieve the intended outcomes, how are we having the impact that we have intended to have, so we can really get that monitoring and review mindset embedded within committees as quickly as possible, whilst also recognising that it's a very fine line to walk with the sheer volume of information that new members will be inducted in and be required to absorb and understand in effect in their first 6 months. So I'm hoping that gives a bit of an overview, but to summarise effectively, we have been working with DSC and regional partners and also WLGA in terms of some of in terms of further understanding of scrutiny, and that is very much a fundamental pillar of our induction programme that we'll be working with. And we're also drawing upon materials from, as mentioned, from WLJ and other areas to really try and remove the death by PowerPoint approach to learning and induction and very much make it an understood topic as much as possible. And the officers within my team play a key role in really supporting all chairs and members in that space. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that, James. I think the point you quite rightly made is it shouldn't be underestimated the amount of information that both new members and re-elected members have to take in a very short period of time. They're inundated with the amount of information they've got to take in. It's new to lots of people, and I think, as you quite rightly say, it's going to take several months. Well, as we've said, we're 4 years in now, and some members don't understand still what scrutiny is all about. So and I'm not saying Vale's the only council. There are others throughout Wales who will be in exactly the same position. So it's not an easy task for the officers to deliver this, and it's actually not an easy task for the members to understand it on occasion. So thank you for that, James. I didn't know whether, as I said, whether you'll be asking Audit Wales to come back in and have a little look, maybe 12 months down the line or 18 months down the line, just to have a reassess. Yeah, okay. Any other questions? No, any comments? Ewan?
Thanks, Chair. Can I come back on the debate, and particularly on the points made by yourself and by Councillor Johnson, because to shed the light a little bit on the reshaping process, I've been pleased to be one of the members that has been extensively consulted through Democratic Services Committee, but also chairs and vice chairs, Resources Committee, in the way we've shaped this process. And I think that the reprioritisation away from what I would call performance scrutiny, which is just reviewing documents all of the time, which are to note, and asking questions and then nothing coming from it, towards a more investigative scrutiny where you have things like task and finish, which is member-led, which is focusing on specific topics where they can get proposals directly in the face of Cabinet, has been a positive one. And I think that the proposal level of scrutiny, these are the three branches that I think about, the proposal level of scrutiny has also been improved by the way that we've reshaped each of the scrutiny committees. But what that has meant is there has been a lack of focus on what Councillor Johnson was mentioning, the performance side. How is the overview of the council performing in each of its roles and each of the ways that we connect with residents as a whole? Now, that's not to say nothing's been happening, but it's just the bit that hasn't been fleshed out as much. And one of the key parts of this in the original proposals was the joint scrutiny. And I'm pleased to be chairing the joint scrutiny on Wednesday, which will be one of the first main opportunities for all members of the council to come in and really reflect and evaluate the way that the reshaping programme has performed and its effect on our governance as a whole when reviewing the annual self-assessment. And I really hope that Councillor Johnson and Councillor Carroll, who you mentioned previously, and all members of the council are able to come in and have an honest reflection and have an honest debate on that. But I hope that in the way that we shape, because that will be member-led too, the way that joint scrutiny works in the future, we can really have a reflection in future in how that needs to be structured, how that needs to be chaired, and the way that joint scrutiny should work in future to try and have a forum for all members to really be engaged in what's being talked about in an overview of the council, while still taking us away from the more public debating side of a format such as full council. I think it's important that we have that forum, and I think it will be a better place once we get to grips as to what that needs to be as a whole. And I hope some of the changes we're making with this meeting on Wednesday will improve that. But, just to say, I hope that everything that has been said today is taken on board and by James, and that we can really improve as a whole council, working collaboratively to make this work in 27, where it really does need to work as new members come in and try and understand the process and understand how to feed into Cabinet and how to get proposals and changes actually effectively completed by the organisation, rather than just discussing items and then nothing coming from it.
Thank you for that, Ewan. Any other comments? No, if there are no other comments, then if we go to the recommendations, first recommendation is that we note the findings from the Audit Wales review of the Council scrutiny arrangements at Appendix A and the response to the review findings and Audit Wales recommendations, Appendix B. Recommendation 2 is that the report be referred to Cabinet for their oversight and endorsement of the proposed Council's actions at Appendix B to address the recommendations. And I'd suggest a recommendation 2.3 that we have a report back on the 22nd of February 27, updating us as to what actions have taken place.
Thank you, Chair. Just with your permission, I'm wondering whether it might be useful if we tied that up with the regulatory report recommendations, and we can make sure that you've got some specific updates as part of that process. And I think, from memory, it's around that time that report would be coming. We can certainly sync that for you.
No, that would be ideal. I don't want anyone doing extra work, Tom, but if it could be included in that regulatory update, I think that's very important for us to see where the council is at in regards to addressing these scrutiny issues. Someone prepared to move, please. Thank you. And seconder, thank you, Councillor Johnson. Anyone against? Nope. Thank you very much. Next report is Audit Wales, the building blocks, capital planning in councils in Wales. Now, I think that's Sam, if by magic.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I will try to keep this brief. So basically, we published our report in January of this year. It's a national study, so we have made reference and included all principal councils in Wales. And it makes recommendations to both councils and the Welsh Government. So basically, with the fieldwork and the methodology, we reviewed documents from all 22 councils, but we only actually completed fieldwork in the form of interviews at 6 councils. But we also spoke to Welsh Government officials and representatives of the WLGA. So moving into the key messages, we found that grant funding processes do not always help councils to plan for the longer term or to provide value for money. And that was mainly to do with timing and coordination of grant funding, whereby grants can be awarded late in the year, giving councils little time to plan and actually spend the funds. And different grants do require different application processes, monitoring arrangements, and could result in many business cases. So we also found the intended outcomes of capital plans are generally not clearly set out by councils. Obviously, there is that necessary focus on complying with the Prudential Code, but that's without clearly setting out how the plans are supporting the achievement of well-being objectives and value for money. So the reasons then for the need for capital spending, we found that is not always clearly set out by councils. We were looking for prioritisation of capital spend based on a full understanding of the condition of all assets, and obviously a responsiveness to national policy and corporate risk. We also found reports on capital spending do not usually focus on value for money achieved from that spending. We found regular progress reports, strong examples of budget monitoring, but a limited focus on whether or not the project achieved its intended outcomes. And we also found the potential to strengthen opportunities to train councillors to better enable them to do that. So there were 3 recommendations. The one for councils, basically to review their capital planning arrangements. And just a signpost to help them do this, we produced a checklist, and that was informed by our findings and our audit criteria. And also just to say that our criteria were based on guidance issued by SIPFA and the Welsh Government. And then also, I know Rachel explained the process, but we were satisfied with the council's response to our recommendation in their management response form. And then with the 2 recommendations for Welsh Government, the first was to review its grant processes to ensure they were proportionate, consistent, and better coordinated. And the second recommends that it provides longer timescales and provides greater notice of those grant announcements. And just to let you know, the Welsh Government have accepted these recommendations, and they have set out how they will respond to them. So that's all I was proposing to say at this point, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sam, for that, and thank you for the report. Are there any questions? Matt?
Not a question, but just a couple. No, just a couple of comments. Just to say, we certainly welcome the report. We're committed to continually improving our financial planning arrangements. That's both revenue and capital, and you'll see some of the improvements we've made around financial planning in the Financial Management Code later on the agenda, where we pick up sustainability and including things like quality impact assessments at the point of consultation. So this is quite timely. We've in respect of recommendation 1 in the report, we've actually got a session with our SLT finance group Wednesday this week, where we're reviewing our arrangements against the checklist. We typically take the capital strategy a little bit later in the cycle than the revenue financial strategy is going to cabinet this Thursday. And as part of the review, we're also committed to looking at the condition surveys. Those are undertaken, and we do have a fairly comprehensive review undertaken, but we don't currently input them into our bidding process as such. We also, as Sam said again, we've got strong monitoring arrangements, but we're looking to strengthen those as well. So at the capital bid stage, we'll have a bit more clarity on what the outcomes of those individual schemes are, and we'll make sure that we're monitoring those as well during the quarterly monitoring cycle. And then finally, as a team, we're just looking into a training programme in the autumn. So we're very supportive of this. Okay.
Thank you for that, Matt. Any questions arising from that? Councillor Johnson?
Thank you, Matt, and Audit Wales for that report. Obviously, I wasn't within the local authorities that took part in that piece of work. Is Matt able to help by explaining how we go about evaluating our capital projects to see whether they have achieved the original aims that they were set out? I'm just thinking in the past that I've worked or undertaken evaluation work across a number of projects, and this is something essential to be able to look back on that project after its completion to be able to see whether or not it has achieved the original goals. Is this something that happens here, or is this something that we say, well, that school or that housing that has been built and that is sufficient to say we've achieved the aim?
Yeah, I think this is one of the areas that we've probably not been strong enough in our capital programming. So I think we're very good at the monitoring and making sure that the scheme's delivered within budget, and obviously that is the key financial consideration. But it's really important that we're clear about why we have these schemes in our programme and what the outcomes are expected to be, and that's the bit that we've not been good enough, and that's what we will be picking up in our capital strategy and bidding process in the autumn.
And if I can just come back, obviously, because of the planning meeting that happened last week and the report earlier, this is one of the things which is at the top of my mind at the moment, because there is a big plan that we have which has changed substantially since the original application or the original bids came before us, and now what we have doesn't really resemble the original plans. And so the question is, how do we go about dealing with projects which are on the horizon and which are happening currently, and how do we evaluate? So in the future, I take it you would be taking steps from the very beginning with new applications, but how do we go about addressing things which are currently going through the process at the moment and are still developing? Will we be doing this as retrospective work, or is it only going to be for new plans that come before us?
I've certainly had my sights more on new plans, but we may need to take a bit of a risk based approach and have a look at some of the bigger schemes in the current programme. Going back to the earlier item on the agenda, the levelling up, there is scrutiny by UK government on value for money. So as part of that bidding process, there was a value for money assessment made. External consultants on the project undertook that for us, but I had that to review and sign off and say I was satisfied with the work they'd done. And this goes a little bit back to the risk question with levelling up as well, because when ABP stepped back and the marine element fell away, there was a reassessment. And UK government have been very flexible actually around the project, but at that point we needed to do a reassessment of the value for money to make sure that it was still delivering. So there are some examples, despite my introductory comments, where we do have a look at outcomes and value for money, but it's not across the piece. It's not.
Any other questions? Any comments? Can I just pick up on that point? And I don't know whether it is linked and it will assist. Audit Wales did a value for money report, which we considered, I don't know, 9 to 12 months ago. And actually there were some recommendations coming out of that, which I should imagine reflect what Councillor Johnson's been said in regards to project and project management. And I think whilst they didn't focus on social services, which have got a really good procurement and value for money procedures, other departments didn't, and it was identifying that. Now I know that is in the regulatory tracker somewhere, so that's one thing that may be worthwhile looking at. We've had a really in-depth look at the Oracle project, which obviously increased quite substantially in money terms, and that was looked at as well. So there's a lot of work going on, but it does need to be tied together, I think. And as the point you made, Matt, is yes, going forward it needs to be tightened up. But, you know, to ensure that historic things actually, there are lessons learned, need to be addressed as well. I don't know whether they're similarities, but to me they are extremely similar.
Yeah, I was just going to say a couple of words on the commissioning work that you mentioned, and we had some particular challenges with that because of the scope and the way in which that piece of work went forward with Audit Wales. But what we have brought into our audit plan that you saw here last cycle is we are going to, on a bit of a rolling programme, have a look at our commissioning arrangements across the council. So we'll pick that up on a regular basis.
Thanks for that, Matt. And the other question is, I think Sam stole my thunder a little bit. Obviously, we've got the management response from the council in regards to the recommendations. Is there a possibility we can see the management response from Welsh Government as to actually what they're going to do to address these issues? Because I think lots of us have experienced Welsh Government coming out on the 28th of February and saying, we've got £10 million here for you to spend, but you've got to spend it by the 31st of March. So it would be useful to see what their management response is and how they're actually going to address these issues. Sam, is there any way we could see it?
Leave that with me, Chair. I'll discuss it with the team. In fact, I did suspect that committee might ask me that today, but apparently some of the recommendations aren't necessarily mutually exclusive with the LG funding arrangements report that has just been published. So I think they are taking a bit of time to come back to us because there's a bit of overlap. But leave it with me and I will come back to you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sam, because obviously some of the recommendations for Welsh Government are blindingly obvious. One department doesn't speak to another and they don't know who's spending what money where and who's doing what. And I can say that because I drafted a report for Welsh Government in regards to some issues they asked me to look at. They don't speak to one another, and actually they could get better bang for their bucks actually if they speak to one another. So it would be useful to see, and I'm sure we could ask for it under FOIA anyway, because it'd be an interesting report. Not saying that we could do anything about it, but it does need to be, I think it would be interesting just to see. Right, okay, if there are no other comments, the recommendations then, the recommendation I think is that we note the findings from the Audit Wales National Review of Capital Planning in councils in Wales, Appendix A, and the response to review findings and Audit Wales recommendations, Appendix B. Recommendation to that the report be referred to Cabinet for their oversight and endorsement of the proposed council's actions, Appendix B, to address the recommendations. And again, Tom, just pick it up, we'll see this in the regulatory tracker as well, in due course. So I'm prepared to move, please. Thank you, Councillor John. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Anyone against? No, thank you. Item 8 is the annual whistleblowing speak out policy and reported incidents. Vicky.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee. So you have before you the annual whistleblowing speak out policy and the incidents that have been reported for 25-26. So that's looking back to July 2025 to July 2026, because the committee will remember that last year you received a report in January 2025 and then asked for a midterm report in July 2025 because the committee had requested further analysis, reporting trends and outcomes and some directorate level reporting along with some organisational learning. And I think the committee was quite satisfied as at July 2025 of the position, and I hope that remains the position today. Just to highlight, you've got an appendix to the report. There's Appendix A, the directorate data from 21-22 to 25-26, whistleblowing incidents by directorate to 31st of March 26, and outcomes by directorate for the period between 2021 and 25-26. In relation to the reports and preparation of it, I'd like to thank colleagues in HR, Tracy Dickinson, Head of HR, colleagues in Customer Relations, Tony Curlis, and also to colleagues in internal audit, and in particular Nick Galvin from the fraud aspect. So during the period between July 2025 and July 2026, there were 13 referrals received through the Speak Out process. Of those 13 referrals, 4 were recorded as whistleblowing concerns under the Speak Out policy. 9 were determined to fall outside of the scope of the policy and were managed, therefore, through alternative procedures, service management arrangements. And I think what we've seen this year, and I'll go into further detail in a moment, is a reduction in the number of reports. And those reports that we have received, a number of those were referred to through other procedures, such as grievance, disciplinary, etc., or other routes. I just wanted to correct one error, because when I drafted this report and got it over very late to Gareth, I'm sorry, Gareth, for publication, I was under the impression that there was one investigation ongoing, and in fact that investigation had already concluded, so you'll see reference in paragraph 1.3 to that, so if that could be noted for the purposes of the minutes. So of the 13, as I say, 4 were recorded, 9 were determined to fall outside, and of those cases concluded during the period that we're looking at, all referrals received through the Speak Out were not upheld, which were subject to an investigation, were not upheld. So those 4 that I've referred to, one matter was considered through the Council's quality assurance and provider assurance processes that fell within the Social Services Directorate. That review was concluded in November last year, and one matter was referred to an external body for consideration. So I think what we're seeing this year is a lower number of substantiated concerns, and I think we're satisfied as officers when we looked at the data and gave this some thorough consideration, is that it does provide assurance, and I hope it provides assurance to the committee that the allegations that we do see raised through the Speak Out process are obviously being appropriately examined and managed through our governance arrangements. What I would touch on very, very quickly is the concerns, and I don't want to go back too far, but the concerns generally in terms of the whistleblowing speak outs are generally more related to workplace behaviours, as I've set out in the report. There is some intelligence, but I think what's key is to focus on the analysis by directorate. And I would like to remind the committee that it's very difficult to compare like for like when you look across our 5 directorates, because obviously the nature of the operational activity within those individual service areas differs considerably. So I think we do need to exercise some care when we're undertaking that comparison, and in terms of the volume of referrals between those directorates, because the workforce obviously differs significantly in size and the operational complexity. In terms of the policy, we've had some discussions around reviewing the policy. I think as things stand currently, we're satisfied that reflecting on the reporting for the last 12 months, that the policy seems to be working. There doesn't seem to be any evidence to the contrary, but it is something that we will keep under review. And I'm satisfied, based on our discussions internally, that regardless of whether or not a whistleblowing speak out is investigated or not, if there is any organisational learning or any points that we can feed back to service areas, we do that. So there's clear management oversight. We have in the past, and I reported on it last year, adopted specific bespoke staff training, policy and procedure review. I think the position's slightly different this year in terms of the activity in that space, but it is something we are continuously mindful of. So the report is before you, members.
Thank you, Vicky, for the report. Again, comprehensive, setting the scene. Are there any questions? No. Oh, Nigel. Nigel, did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for that. Must press the wrong button. So three quick questions, if I can, please. They are quick. Firstly, workplace behaviours. I think I know what that means, but is there anything you can give us just to sort of elaborate on that at all? Why would cases not be investigated? I think you referenced 6 in there that were not investigated. Just wondering why that would be. And third question is, have any whistleblowers left the organisation? Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. So in relation to the first question, workplace behaviours, they are those types of behaviours which properly fall within other policy areas. So, for example, complaints about managers or issues within that kind of context. So they would usually then be referred to the grievance or disciplinary, or there would be an investigation, an informal investigation within the service area itself. The reason why they're not investigated is very much dependent on the nature of the whistleblowing with reference to the policy, and whether or not that speak out falls within the definition of the policy and the legislation. There is a correlation, I would say, between the workplace behaviours and the reasons why those speak outs that are not investigated are not investigated, and those are generally, there's a connection there. The committee did ask on the last occasion for information about how many whistleblowers, and I acknowledge that, and I apologise because I don't have that information, but if you can make a recommendation today, Chair, I'm happy to feed that information back to the committee. I'm not entirely certain, and I need to check this with colleagues, I'm not entirely certain whether we capture that information, but I can certainly ask the question, and it was a point that was raised previously.
Andrew?
Thanks, Chair. I think that's a very difficult data to capture because by the very nature of them, some of them will be anonymous.
Okay. Do you investigate anonymous whistleblowing? Yeah. Okay.
I apologise. I think there are certain cases, yeah, we do investigate anonymous whistleblowers, and I think it is difficult, but they're not all anonymous, so we could give an indication, but I think it's really, really difficult because of the nature of the policy.
Thanks for that, Vicky. Any other questions? Just a quick one from me, Vicky. In regards to the 4 that we recorded as whistleblowing concerns, or actually 9, I assume the person making the whistleblowing complaint, or what was a whistleblowing complaint, the 13, they have a right of appeal against the decision to say it's not whistleblowing?
Not under the policy, no. But there may be other avenues, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions? Any comments? No. If we go to the recommendation then, the recommendation is that we note the contents of the report and the analysis of the speak out reports received during the reporting period. Number 2 is that we continue to receive an annual report regarding implementation of the whistleblowing speak out policy and reported incidents. And 3, if at all possible, the number of whistleblowers that left the authority be mentioned in the next annual report. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you. Thank you. Seconded. Thank you. Anyone against? Oh, thank you. Next item is item 9, the unaudited statement of accounts 25-26. Gemma?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I was planning on having a little bit of focus on kind of process, so what went well, what didn't go well. I'll pick up some of the headlines from the accounts, but at a very high level, but I'm happy to take any questions or queries, and I'll absolutely do my best. And then I'll touch very briefly on the audit, but obviously it's very early days. So in terms of what went well, we handed over the accounts on the 30th of June, so that's always a relief. So I think the team pulled together really well. We had 2 kind of very minor projects that were led by some of our trainee accountants. So we developed a new accruals template and some notes, giving people some guidance on what an accrual should look like, what kind of information they would need to support. And that really helped the process. Our trainee accountants themselves have really developed, and that, again, they had a little bit more experience as part of the closing process, and that's really helpful. We did have some vacancies going into closing, but the team pulled together really well. We had some issues with related parties last year, and so that was a particular focus, and we identified a preparer and a reviewer for each related party, and caused a little bit of confusion to start with, but I think that worked quite well as well, but we'll certainly see during the audit. We also reviewed some working papers, and I think we're in a far better position in terms of handing over working papers to the audit at the close of the audit. And we did have the city deal accounts by the 31st of May, which really helped the process as well. In terms of what didn't go quite so well, as I say, we did have a couple of vacancies during closing, particularly our capital accountant role was vacant. We had some agency support through that process, and we were fortunate to be able to appoint a capital accountant from a neighbouring authority who started in June. You'll note that there's a prior period adjustment in the accounts. So I think in recent years, we've perhaps sold a couple of plots of land that we didn't have in our asset register, which kind of begged the question, why wasn't it in our asset register? So we have done a review of the terrier, so that was led by our estates team, and we identified a number of assets that needed to be valued. It was a significant volume, but a lot of it will be kind of small plots of land that were in the same area. So when I say 286 assets, it's because there are lots of small ones. And of course, the auditor would be doing a significant piece of work during the audit period to verify that completeness. That list of assets was identified during the accounts preparation period. So we actually received that valuation from the valuer the Tuesday before we handed in the accounts. And that significantly impacted our QA time. So something always goes wrong, and we do allow a contingency in terms of QA of the accounts. There are some silly mistakes in the accounts that would have been picked up had we had more time to QA the accounts. So we will do better next year, absolutely. But that is definitely something that didn't go well this year. Because the SIT for code has changed, and we now have to index our assets each year. And we're only allowed to revalue our assets every 5 years. Because we, following COVID and all the kind of market disparity that we've had during COVID, we had quite a lot of desktop valuations. So we actually valued all of our building assets in year, which is a massive undertaking. But that the advantage of that is, firstly, we didn't have to index our building assets, but also we've started with this really strong, positive position in terms of valuation of assets. In terms of headlines of the accounts, if I talk about reserves first, so usable reserves, which are cash-backed reserves, I think that position in terms of our year-end position is slightly masked in terms of, because we've had that increase in the HRA reserve and also capital grants unapplied of 18 million. So we have seen a reduction in general fund reserves and earmarked reserves, which, if you read these accounts alongside the outturn report of the council, we've obviously had some unplanned overspends, and obviously the position with schools deficits as well that we have offset. We are expecting to use those capital grants unapplied. A significant proportion of that relates to the Levelling Up scheme, and so we expect to use those grants in the next couple of years. The value of our property, plant and equipment has increased to over £1 billion. Now, some of that is that prior period adjustment that we restated 24-25 for, but also obviously a significant capital programme. So we're talking about capital programme of £74 million, and we've revalued those assets, although in the council dwelling space there has been a reduction in the valuation of council dwellings, which reflects the kind of market position in terms of sale of houses. I have talked about the prior period adjustment, but I am happy to go into more detail if members wish. And then in terms of the pension liability, we've had the triennial valuation, which impacted the 25-26 accounts. So for the funded schemes, the pension liability has reduced to nil, so there's no pension asset or liability, but we do have an unfunded pension scheme which relates to largely to reorganisation from 1996, and that has a liability of 8.2 million in the council's accounts, and that's after taking account of the asset ceiling and the minimum funding guarantee. Just to touch briefly on joint committees, so in terms of the shared regulatory service, those accounts went to joint committee on the 18th, and they're attached as an appendix here. You also have the annual governance statement for the shared regulatory service at the end of those accounts, although the council's annual governance statement is a separate item. There were some issues that were picked up as part of the internal audit that informs that annual governance statement, and there is an action plan at the end of the shared regulatory service annual governance statement. Similar trend in terms of the pension liability, so the pension liability has reduced to nil in 25-26. There has been an increase in usable reserves, but that's because there's been some specific sums set aside to deliver schemes in future years. In terms of the regional adoption service, so you'll recall I didn't actually bring you any accounts last year for the Vale Valleys and Cardiff Regional Adoption Service. So Audit Wales has undertaken a national review of the all the different adoption arrangements across Wales. They informed us in March that we need to prepare full accounts for 24-25. So we are preparing the two sets of accounts alongside each other. And we're, with a positive take on it, it's a great learning opportunity to develop more financial accounting in our team. So that's being led by one of our trainee accountants. And we've done all the calculations, but now we need to do the wider accounts. So our aim is to finalise those by September, and I believe Audit Wales have scheduled in the audit of the 24-25 accounts for October, so that will be working out okay. Okay, those are the main points, but I'm happy to take any questions on the accounts.
Well, firstly, Gemma, can I just thank you and your team for getting the draft statement of accounts prepared and actually delivered to Audit Wales by the 30th of June. I think it's no mean feat in reality. I think a lot of people think they're straightforward, but it takes an enormous amount of time. Our accounts, council accounts, are extremely complex, and I think you and the team need to be complimented for that. And things do happen. There are hiccups, and if any of us say we're infallible, then we're all telling lies, really. But there we are. So thank you very much for that. Obviously, the draft statements accounts are before us. Just amazed that in the recommendation, obviously, you saying that any comments of this committee can be fed in to the process. These will go on public consultation, won't they? And I don't know when that is, but I'm sure that if any members wish to make any other comments, if they miss something in this committee, then they can do so as part of the public consultation exercise, and they'll be taken into account by Matt.
Just to advise, the accounts are open for inspection in August. So I think it's the 3rd to the 28th of August. Might have exaggerated that slightly. We've got an advert on the council's website, but the date of the inspection of the accounts is the 1st of September. If you wish to talk to the auditor about the accounts.
Lovely. Thank you. And I think you need to be congratulated for all the other accounts now you're doing as well. You know, to be told on when you said the 30th of March, well, we need another set of accounts for the adoption service for 24-25, and I should imagine you're doing 25-26 as well. Again, tremendous amount of work. So please convey our thanks to your team. Any questions? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Gemma. This is a feast of statistics, a 200-page report, and I also noted that the income and expenditure of the local authority is towards 600 million, so this is a substantial figure, and it certainly deserves all of the praise and attention for Gemma and attention from people, since this is quite the achievement to have delivered this in such a small timescale that was available for her to do this since the end of the financial year. I have a number of questions that have already been answered. I was going to ask about the reserves. So perhaps during that conversation today, I noticed that there's over expenditure of the reserves for schools from some 7 million, but there is also the housing revenue account has increased by some 6 or 7 million because we are borrowing that money ahead of time. Gemma also referred to the capital grants in applied account because of course that 15 million, as she says, gives us a little bit of a mask on the statistics which is before us, because it shows essentially that there is more reserves that has been ring-fenced for use than is true in the real picture. Is there a way perhaps to give us some kind of additional note within this document just to explain that account? Because it wasn't initially clear to me why this was increasing from 3 million to 15 million, by 15 million, sorry. And there's no other reference to that capital grants and applied accounts in that document, I don't think. So just as a suggestion, is there a way of explaining the account and how it works? So Gemma's explained today that this is funding that we have received ahead of time, and that is for big projects such as the Levelling Up Fund and the Vale funds, but there's no explanation of this, so I'd appreciate one because it's an obvious question to me. And then I also have 3 real questions about this process. So the first is on page, hang on, it's right at the start of the report. I note page 5, but it might be 5 of the report. And this is, sorry, this is the problem with 200-page reports, isn't it? So my question, it is on page 5, which is really page 11 of the entire document, and that includes a table which refers to the amended revenue budget, and then the actual variance, and then net transfer to/from reserve. So the 2 questions I have on that for Gemma, and those are, why are we using amended revenue budget rather than original? And from when is the revised budget? From where does that date? And then, slightly differently, is there a relationship then in that last column with the net transfer to from reserve with the other three, which obviously show the revised budget and the budget at the end of the year and the difference between those two. But I wasn't quite sure what exactly is the relationship between those three columns and that last column. Does that make sense as a question? And I have two other questions, but they are somewhere else in the document. So if Gemma can answer my first one, and then I'll come back with the others. Thank you.
So in terms of the revised budget, Councillor Johnson, so we set it in around November time. So it's typically when the kind of second quarter gets reported to Cabinet. There's probably not much difference between the original budget and the revised budget. Probably it's more of a tool that we use for schools particularly. So the school's original budget is just all on the school's formula, and then any movement to or from balances. And then at the revised budget, which we do a lot early for schools, we would put all the detail of the school has signed off his budget, and this is how it's using it. We did used to use revised a lot more when we had central recharges in budgets, because we used to amend those central recharges every year. It probably is a tool that we could make more use of, but at the moment there is very little difference. And I should say that the total of the revised budget is the same as the total of the original budget. So it's not me, finding extra money from somewhere. So I think it's probably doesn't mean a lot in this context, and it is a tool that we could make more use of in future, but it is reported around the Q2 monitoring, I think. In terms of the net transfer to and from reserves, of course, so when I'm talking about variances, I'm talking about unplanned overspends, but we do use reserves quite a lot in a planned way. So for instance, we have posts that are funded from reserves, and we would be funding a project from reserves. So the variance favourable or adverse reflects kind of unplanned, so it excludes any unplanned drawdown from reserves, but it would be net of a planned drawdown from reserves. So I suppose the net transfer to and from reserves is all of that, because I have to reconcile back to the movement in reserves on the bottom line. But the variance, favourable and adverse, is just trying to outline that genuine overspend in the service area. But I'm always interested if there's a better way to present it. So if it's not clear, I'm certainly happy to have a think about it going forward. But it's just trying to show that genuine overspend as opposed to a post that we've agreed to fund from reserves for 3 years.
Thank you for your explanation, Gemma. And the reason I raise this is just because this is a table that appears very early in the documents, and I'm familiar with the total on the right side of every table being the norm. So it's hard for me just to feel that this isn't necessarily relevant to what's before it. So I'm not sure if there's an alternative way of displaying this on the screen or on the page, but I'm just raising that I would normally expect for the 3 columns on the left to reach some conclusion in the column on the right, and it doesn't look as if it's completely relevant as I'm reading. So that's all. I don't know if there's any way of presenting that differently, or if this is just one way of doing it. If I can move on to my other 2 questions, one which perhaps is more of a point than a question. Something that has arisen in a meeting in Bridgend last week regarding why we note the number of people who receive a salary over 60,000 within the report. Is this a statutory requirement to report on that figure? Because of course, the number of people who fall into that category increases naturally because of the increase in the number of employees. And so is the original purpose of this, was it to note the number of senior officers? But by now, I don't know if it's a bit of a fiscal drag, but the number of members of staff who are caught within this figure is increasing. So is there a reason why we're still referring to this 60,000 if this is statutory set figure? And I'm just going to continue on with my third question, and that is regarding the housing revenue census. And if you're able, I think it's page 101 of the report, and it's housing revenue account. And I just wanted to ask questions regarding a piece of expenditure which is explained as revaluation charge to CIS. And I take it that's comprehensive income expenditure statement. But there is a change, a substantial change from the expenditure within those 2 years, which is 37.6 million last year, and then only 19 million this year. And I just wanted some kind of explanation, some clarity regarding that change, just because obviously it's half of the expenditure. And so if Gemma could answer the first one and perhaps Matt the second, please.
I'll answer both. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. So in terms of the 60,000, so it is statutory. I think it's Welsh Government regulation, the 60,000, because I think it's slightly different in Scotland and in England as well. I agree. So what's happened is with inflation, we've seen more and more officers fall into that over £60,000 level. So I think all chief officers now are over that level. There has been some discussion with Welsh Government about whether that level needs to be reviewed. But it will be on the work programme. So it may not be, something that's in place for next year. But certainly I agree the disclosure would probably be more meaningful if it was set at a slightly higher level. In terms of the revaluation adjustment for HRA, so as you know, we have unusable reserves in the accounts, and one of those is the capital adjustment account. So we put through statutory adjustments through the financial accounts, and then we have an adjustments note then that reverses those adjustments out of the housing revenue account and the general fund, and it takes them over into the unusable reserve. So in this case, the capital adjustment account. So as I mentioned briefly in the report, we did a full revaluation of all our council dwellings in year. Now, our council dwellings are valued on a beacon approach, which reflects the housing market, but then there's an adjustment for social housing that reflects the lower rents you can attract as under the HRA process. Now, as you know, the housing market isn't as buoyant as it has been previously, and therefore we've seen a reduction in the value of our council dwellings. Also, building a council house is quite costly, and that doesn't always equate to the value of the council house going forward. So we have an adjustment for those revaluations that goes through the income and expenditure, but there's no cash impact of that. It then gets reversed out and taken across into the capital adjustment account. So it's a statutory adjustment, but it can distort the accounts for the readers of the accounts, but it's reflecting the fact that there's been a change in the valuation of housing assets. Slightly complicated by the fact that there are also adjustments against the revaluation reserve if there's been a previous revaluation gain, and those are actually shown in other comprehensive income and expenditure down the bottom of the I&E. So it's not always the full picture as well in terms of the revaluation movements for a particular class of assets. Does that make sense, kind of?
So this is expenditure 38 million last year because of the reevaluation, and it's half of that figure this year. So what is the process which takes us from figure A and then figure B being half as much this year? I'm not entirely sure how those two figures relate to each other. Could you please explain?
So they're both one-off figures based on the valuations we've had undertaken on council dwellings. So we had a full valuation last year as well for council dwellings because the housing market fluctuates so much and the value of council dwellings is such that, and our materiality is 5 million. So and it's a good job we did have a full valuation because 37 million is obviously material to the accounts. So it's last year the council dwellings were judged to have reduced in value by, I'm saying 37 million, but it doesn't reflect the revaluation reserve element. And this year for 25-26, the value of council dwellings is judged to have been moved by 19 million. So they're one-off adjustments. Obviously they affect the valuation of council dwellings. Perhaps previously council dwellings were slightly overstated in terms of the performance of the housing market. And some of that movement is correct in the value of assets. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? No? I don't know whether I should declare an interest because the meeting that Councillor Johnson was referring to was the meeting I was chairing in Bridgend last week. But exactly the same answer was given, Gemma. It was because of wage increases and other items that were taken into consideration. There was quite a large increase, I think, that was at the 60,000 mark. So yeah, so thank you for that. If there are no other questions, any comments? No, if there are no comments, just first thing to say that obviously if members got any other questions now after, you know, going away and having another read through this report before they want to go to sleep tonight, then please pose them to Gemma and the team. But the recommendations are that the committee notes the unaudited Vale of Glamorgan statement of accounts for 25-26. And the comment in regards to what Councillor Johnson made in regards to looking at the explanation for the reserves figure, if that could be looked at going forward as the comment. And then that be referred to the Section 151 officer for subsequent discussion with the Council's external auditors and Audit Wales. And then 2.2, again, that we note the unaudited Joint Committee Shared Regulatory Service Statement of Accounts and Shared Regulatory Services Annual Government Statement. And that, I think there were any comments on that. And then obviously that be referred as is to the Head of Finance as Treasurer of the Joint Committee for the subsequent discussion with the external auditors. Audit Wales. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you. You can have a seconder. Thank you. Anyone against? No. Thank you very much. Item 10, the draft annual governance statement 25-26, which will accompany the draft statement of accounts.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take this one. It's Andrew Wathen, Head of the Regional Internal Audit Service. So just before you this evening, members, you have the draft annual governance statement for 25-26, which, as Gemma's mentioned already, will accompany the draft statement of accounts for 25-26. So this year we've incorporated an exec summary, which is a concise version of the long-winded document. We have tried to streamline it as much as we can, but we do need to demonstrate that we are compliant with our Code of Corporate Governance and the governance arrangements are in line with the SIP for Solace, delivering good governance in local government framework. So if I could just refer to the exec summary, Chair. This statement, the annual governance statement, does set out how the Council has complied with the 7 principles of the framework for 25-26 and provides an overview of the effectiveness of these arrangements. What we've done this year is identify any improvements that have been made and any potential improvements moving forward. But overall, the Council continues to demonstrate good governance, supported by a well-established framework of policies, procedures and internal controls that underpin effective decision-making, accountability and transparency. The governance arrangements remained in place throughout 25-26 and have continued to evolve in response to organisational priorities, external expectations and a challenging operating environment. As already reported into committee, the Council received a panel performance assessment back in November 24. And as part of that process, they commented on the governance arrangements, which identified that it was using its resources efficiently and has sound governance arrangements in place, no significant areas of concern identified. So for 25-26, again, no significant governance issues identified, but we have identified some areas of improvement because the Council recognises the importance of continuous improvement. There were no significant issues in 24-25 carried forward, which were to be addressed or actioned in 25-26. Again, we identified areas of improvement. So as an overall summary, Chair, the Council continues to operate within a challenging financial and demand-led environment, requiring sustained focus on transformation, prioritisation and the effective use of resources. An ongoing emerging issue is the replacement of the social care system, which we mentioned last year, which does remain a recognised corporate risk, and the Council will continue to manage this risk alongside other key pressures through its established governance, performance and risk management frameworks. The draft annual governance statement has gone through SLT and gone through the Strategic Insight Board for comment before coming to Governance and Audit Committee this evening for your comment and input. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Yeah, thank you again, Andrew, for the comprehensive report and the executive summary on this occasion. And I think the Appendix C is also extremely useful, which identifies areas for improvement, several of which we've already discussed today, this evening, in that report. So, you know, it's pleasing to see. Questions, Councillor Goodjohn.
Okay, if you indulge me, I have 4 questions, but most of them are quite quick. So firstly, anyone to answer, could we see the signalling change plan?
Quick question, Councillor Goodjohn, and a quick answer. Yes, certainly I can circulate it to members via Gareth and Democratic Services.
That is superb. Second, can I just ask about the communications with towns and community councils referred to as their understanding constitutionally and of the roles of the Vale Council and town and community councils? I'd like some more information as to what that entails, you know, what's being imagined here, because I think there's a lot of benefit that could come from it, but I need to know what it is first.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. We took a report, but probably the most useful thing that I can do is circulate the report that went to the Community Liaison Committee last month, setting out some proposals in terms of how those arrangements could be taken forward. I'm not sure that the minutes are up on the website just yet, but the outcome of the discussion on that item was that the report was widely welcomed by representatives of the town and community councils, but also the members of the committee. And we're making preparations for the first forum meeting to be held in early October. But I can certainly make sure that that report is circulated to members as well.
Thank you so much. Thirdly, can I ask about the review of the Directorate self-assessment? I'm just interested as to what is going to be reviewed, and you know, is there going to be within this review any taking into account the transparency of this process, which has been improved in the annual self-assessment this year, but I feel like could be significantly improved as to how the directorates are coming up with the decisions that they are making as to their judgments, and then it going on to a process of peer review. You know, that would be quite interesting to know how we can try and broaden particularly members' awareness of how that process takes place, and how the decisions as to the final evaluations are coming through. And if I can expand on that a little bit, just on the budget process, it would be interesting to see if something like that could even be replicated in the budget process as to how officers are coming to the decisions as to the savings proposals and the cost pressure proposals that they end up putting forward to Cabinet, for example, in draft budgets. It would be good to see if, as part of any review of these processes, we can try and expand the transparency and accountability around these processes as well.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Absolutely, no problem at all. And the self-assessment process we review each year as part of the report that is published, identifying areas for improvement. And this committee have been central to identifying some of those. And I'm grateful for the feedback from members of this committee. In terms of the proposals to look at the Directorate self-assessment for 26-27, so when we get to this time next year, what we're looking at is how meaningful it is for each of the directorates to review all the aspects of the self-assessment, because what I think are finding from some of the feedback from members in previous years is that we then go on to talk about some of the aspects like the use of resources at a corporate or council-wide level in a separate section of the report. One of the things that we've done this year is look at how we can, rather than replicate other reports, so for example, the Director of Social Services is required to publish an annual report. It does a similar but not the same job as the self-assessment, so we've tried to bring the two things closer together. But one of the questions that I suppose we're asking ourselves is, what's the fundamentally important part of assessment of directorates, and is that the achievement of Fail 2030 commitments that are in the annual directorate plans, and then the use of resources, the workforce, the digital, the engagement, etc., can be done in the way that we've been looking to do this year, which is a more evidence-based consultative process. I think it's a really interesting point, Councillor Goodjohn, in terms of how elected members can get more involved in that process. You'll be aware, because of your role, that scrutiny chairs are part of the process of challenge of each of the directors, and that forms a part of the self-assessment. I think there's been some work to improve that or enhance that challenge this year by involving more staff groups. The consultation which is launched as well will involve partners, for example. I think it's an interesting proposition in terms of the budget proposals and how could an element of challenge be built in to that. I have to say that the strategic leadership team discussions around potential budget proposals are challenging in of themselves. However, there is definitely an opportunity for us to reflect on that. And if committee were minded to make a recommendation, I'm sure that I can work with Matt and Gemma to reflect on that as to how we could build that into part of the process this year.
And let me reflect on that in comments later on. And I'll just finish by asking the same question that I asked last meeting to Andrew. Now that he's here, hopefully Joan has commented to him about this, as to the evidence contained within the annual governance statement this time, if he believes that all of the evidence within the annual governance statements and the internal audit opinion is sufficient evidence, in his opinion, in order to determine, as part of an annual self-assessment, the arrangements of the entire governance system of the council, or if there are more pieces of evidence that would be required in order to make such a broad judgment as a whole.
Okay, thanks. I think, as you know from our planning process, we can only do things on a sample basis throughout the year, and we can't do a complete audit of everything that the council provides. It delivers over 200 different services, so we have to prioritise that. Likewise with the governance statement, we cover the key areas where we can. It's circulated to key officers for their input into the document to make it as comprehensive as we possibly can make it. It incorporates our internal audit work and our opinions, which is, as I just said, is on a sample basis. It then goes through to SLT for them to comment on. So at a director level, If there's anything significant that's missed, they've got an opportunity to include it at that stage. It then goes to the Strategic Insight Board, so they've got another opportunity to add further comment if anything is significantly missing, and obviously it comes here. So on that basis, I'm pretty confident we've covered all the angles, and I've got the key officers involved to make the appropriate contributions.
Any other questions? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. I'm going to be fairly succinct. This is a very interesting document. Regarding Appendix B, which is the things that we were expected to achieve within this year, this includes the aim on the left and then the response on the right. Is the purpose of this document then to say or to confirm that these things have happened completely successfully if they appear on the right or not? Because I'm used to seeing perhaps the RAG ratings and so on, but since this just gives a narrative, I take it this explains that yes, we have achieved everything that is set out in the principles A, B and so forth there. But onto the main question, just regarding the town and county councils, town and community councils, one thing that is missing, and I understand the intention of working alongside clerks so they can understand better the processes and the constitutional matters, but of course a lot of the community councils are going to be combined at the end of the year, at the end of this council year, and so is this a part of that to work out? Because this is a piece of work which will be quite substantial to combine these councils and make sure that the governance doesn't cause any issues or any problems as these new councils are formed. Does this relate to this, or have I misunderstood the purpose of this statement? Thank you. So 2 points, which are completely different.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Diolch. In terms of the first question, we don't RAG rate the areas for improvement. As mentioned as part of the process, there were no significant governance issues identified in 24, but as a council that continually looks to improve and self-assess, those are the things that we felt as though we could improve on in terms of making our governance arrangements even better. So the right-hand side is action taken against the left-hand side. So anything that's mentioned in the right-hand side has been achieved, and that's been confirmed through the validation process and involving various offices around the organisation. So I hope that answers that part of the question. In terms of the second part of the question, this statement relates to 25-26 and the governance arrangements in place for the council, not necessarily the governance arrangements for the town and community councils. It's something we could consider, and I'd have to take have some consultation with the monitoring officer to work through whether that actually affects the governance arrangements of the council or not. But at the moment, that would be a 26-27 potential issue.
Just to confirm that I am referring to what is Principle A originally, but I do understand.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, we'll take those comments on board.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Andrew. You could ask a much simpler question, so please, positively. The word significant has been mentioned a significant amount of times. I guess I'm just interested in what constitutes a significant governance issue. What kind of criteria apply around that? And has anything this year given you food for thought as to what that looks like.
I'm just thinking whether we've got a definition of what significant is. I've seen it, or I can't remember if we've recorded this within the statement. So I'll take that back and look into that in a bit more detail. But in terms of our assessment of significance, obviously from an internal audit perspective, we deal with high, medium and low ratings. It's on a judgment. It is subjective to a certain extent, but it's based on evidence that we found during the audits which we undertake, or lack of evidence which we would expect to be in place. Then the matters are, the governance statement then is shared with key officers around the organisation. We take into account the corporate risk register and anything that kind of jumps out to this, which is material to the accounts more so, would be a significant governance issue. But from the collation of this document, there's nobody reporting a significant governance issue. There's just areas for improvement at the moment.
Any other questions? No? Any comments? That's good job.
Right, can I make one comment and then ask committee to consider if they want to agree to some recommendations? So firstly, can I just make the comment on the Youth Council in particular and its engagement with the scrutiny process? Although I very much appreciate James in particular's engagement with the Youth Council and it's trying to involve it a lot more with the scrutiny process. It does need a lot more investment in it and time and effort put into it in order for it to be a functioning proper part of our scrutiny process and trying to engage young people as part of our scrutiny process and their understanding of democracy and local government. So, you know, it would be nice, although I appreciate the successes that have been made within the year, to also see that as a potential area for improvement as part of the document. There's a long way to go on it, and I think there's a lot that can be done, especially with in the past with Youth Cabinet, the great benefits we've had from it in the past. For corporate complaints, I think there needs to be more mention of the shift in responsibilities with corporate complaints, away from C1V and towards democratic services. I think that's an issue that we need to keep an eye on, and how that functions in the future, if that's being successful as a transfer over. And also, you know, the timescales at the moment for corporate complaints are not satisfactory, and they're not to our targets. So, you know, this needs to be something that's under constant review and as part of our areas for improvement for 26, 27, and in my opinion. The final thing is, to some extent, what we talked about with Tom, you know, I'd like to have a recommendation around that and the transparency, particularly in the directorate self-assessment and the budget process. And if I can make one specific recommendation I'd like for Cabinet to consider as including within the final annual government statement when we see it next time, is to consider the setting up of a budget working group, as we spoke about previously, in such as scrutiny chairs and vice chairs. We've had evidence from Bridgend as to the success of a neutral working group, which is away from the eyes of the public, which is allows members to delve a lot deeper into the depths of the budget process and to try and come out with recommendations for council and for cabinet to positively work forward with improved savings proposals and cost pressure proposals, which actually better reflect the priorities of members from across the council. This would be neutral, not in a political basis, but a lot more like the scrutiny process or a task and finish process as we do at the moment. I'd really like for Cabinet to consider that as a possibility of being set up either this year, or look at the evidence for it to be set up in future years and really put some work into what that could look like if it would be implemented in the future.
Thank you, Ewan. Gareth?
Yeah, if I just come in on that point, we had a meeting this morning with James, Democratic Services. So it's one aspect we are looking at. Obviously, I have a very early stages, but we are looking at a budget working group. Now, how that shapes is still to be decided, but there are timescales around the next couple of months to try and get something in place. So it's something that's happening, but obviously, just give it back up to this committee would give it more ownership. Thanks.
Okay, any other comments? Matt?
I was only just going to say much the same as Gareth. So we've had some initial officer discussions about it, and we're exploring it. And certainly from my perspective, I'm always looking at ways we can improve scrutiny of the council's budget, and it's been it's a perennial challenge, isn't it?
Tom, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, thank you. Just for completeness on Councillor Goodjohn's other question around complaints and that transfer of responsibility. I'm probably less concerned about the transfer of responsibility because the member of staff who used to work in customer relations doing that work is working in democratic services doing that work now. So there is an element of continuity. But just for the reassurance of committee, because Audit Wales made a series of recommendations relating to corporate complaints, that is part of your regulatory report tracking, so you will get those regular updates. We're also committed to obviously continuing to bring the regular report on complaints handling, and I can assure Councillor Goodjohn that we are giving it due consideration and effort and momentum in the organisation, and it is an area that we've identified as part of Brilliant Basics that we need to improve on. So it's very useful having this committee keeping us true to our word in terms of those recommendations as well. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And just a couple of comments from me. I think it's essential that the council engages with the Youth Council. Certainly if they've got cabinet members, I don't know what happens on this authority, but we were in my previous hat used to invite the cabinet member for the service area to the scrutiny committee so that they could engage in that process. I think it's very important to have a budget working group. We certainly had one 7 years ago where we had a cross-party budget working group, and again that can pay dividends as long as everyone comes to the party and put their politics outside and look after the best interests of the authority, which is what they're supposed to represent. So I think, you know, they're good ideas. I think in regards to some of these recommendations, there are two recommendations for me, Ewan, coming out of this. The one contained in the report, if we can go to that, if there are no other comments, I think we need to note the contents of this report and propose that the following comments on the draft governance statement 25-26, which are, you raised the issue about wanting a document. You raised the issue about Town and Community Council report be produced. You raised the issue about directorate self-assessments and budget formulation. I think they obviously all need to be in that recommendation because they're commenting upon this governance statement, and the two separate issues for me can be in a separate recommendation that Cabinet consider engaging with the Youth Council and setting up a budget working group going forward, because it doesn't affect this governance statement. As long as you're happy with that.
Can
it's
I
your recommendation.
Just on the one recommendation on engagement with the Youth Council, I do want to clarify they do very much engage with the Youth Council. Right. That does happen. I don't think that needs to be a separate recommendation. My point is more, you know, there's much more work to be done. It can't just be in the things we've done section. It also needs to be things we will do next year.
In the future.
We follow it up next year in next year's report. So that's all it is for me.
Could that be an area for improvement?
Yes, definitely. I think that's what it should be, really.
Okay, so we'll pick that up then as an area for improvement.
Would be grand.
And then the separate one will be the budget working group. Is that clear, Gareth?
Yes.
So we pick up all the points Ewan raised in regards to it. Obviously, the issue about town and community councils and the future of them, about the amalgamations and that. I think, obviously, Andrew needs to take some advice from the monitoring officer on that. Whether it affects this my view is it doesn't in reality, because they're separate legal entities, and the only responsibility I think the council's got, and I stand to be corrected, is the monitoring of those and breaches of code of conduct and such like. And I know they sit on standards committee and they engage, but they are their own separate legal entities. But obviously clarify that with the monitoring officer. So if we're clear as mud now as to where we're going, we note this report, the comments that are made be taken into account in redrafting possibly some of the issues within the statement, a governance statement, and then we would recommend whether it needs to come back, but do we need to give some delegated powers to someone to do that? Tom?
The final version of the AGS will be appended to the accounts that you'll see
Okay.
later on in the year, won't
Okay.
it? So I'm wondering whether perhaps Andrew.
Thanks.
It's just the process, Andrew, for me now.
Yeah, so now the draft statement of accounts are ready. The AGS goes along with this draft statement to the external auditor. They do a review and then feedback.
Okay.
So as part of that review process, we can incorporate.
And we'll
this
feed back in
information.
our comments.
Yeah, and you'll see the revised draft at a later stage.
Okay.
Back
Good.
in this committee.
Okay, as long as it picks up the points that certainly you and other members made.
What you'd have seen in previous years is older wells don't typically make, I was about to use the word significant then, any major changes to the document. And you know, as Andrew said, it's gone through quite an extensive review period, but we do make little tweaks and changes to it. And we do that in response to the audit. So
okay.
It will be reviewed across the summer and then brought back for approval here and sign off.
No, that's great, because obviously, you know, asking us for our comments, then they do need to be taken into consideration, hopefully amended in the incorporated in the document. So we've got that, and then we've got we recommend the cabinet they consider setting up a budget working group for this next budget and ongoing years. Someone prepared to move, please. Thank you. Can I have a seconder? Thank you. Anyone against? No. Thank you very much. Financial Management Code 2526. Gemma.
Yeah. Right, so Financial Management Code, you'll have seen this report from us for a few years now. So I think we first introduced it in 2022. We've been trying to refine it as we go. Last year for the first year, we had an internal audit review of a small section of the report. And this year, internal audit have looked at another section of the report, and the internal audit report is appended as part of the report to Governance and Audit Committee. We have some key officers who feed into the refresh, and then we take it to SLT for review. But we're absolutely keen to get your comments and thoughts about it, because I think, as has been pointed out at this committee, it's easy for us to say that we're fantastic at financial management. And I think we picked up on the previous items some elements that perhaps we could look to build on going forward. So I think some of the key points that we pick out in terms of the report is that we feel like the kind of structure around financial sustainability, given that there are constraints, increasing constraints around the resources, has improved as part of our 26-27 budget setting. We highlight some of the transformation in terms of reshaping Vale 2030 and the alignment, I suppose, of those reports as well as a step forward, and some kind of improved rigour around how we manage school deficits. So, for instance, we have a dedicated officer now managing those recovery plans, and we've set out a new approach. We also pick up in the report some of the changes in terms of embedding the procurement legislation that's taken place. And at the end of the Financial Management Code, there are 2 action plans. So the first action plan was the 25-26 action plan, and we look at our kind of progress against that. So Just to quickly run through the tasks, so we had a social value task in terms of publishing a streamlined framework, and we considered that that was in place. Embedding the identification of leasing transactions and demonstrating a formal value for money sign-off process, because I think if you're entering into a vehicle, it's very easy to sign off, say, you know, an amount every year without thinking about the whole life costs of that arrangement. So we certainly are better at gathering the leasing information, but we need to do more work to embed that value for money and sign off. And I think that goes alongside some of the points that we've drawn out around the capital programme as well, and will sit naturally around those changes we will be doing in terms of capital bids. There was something around the school's procurement officer, so that is in place and that post has been made permanent. There was some initial progress in terms of delivering joint procurement. And I know there are a couple of schemes that officer is working on that are particularly helpful for me around schools' booking systems, in terms of income generation, and also in terms of punch out to some supplies identified via a framework for the Oracle Fusion system, and then reviewing the Council Scrutiny Committee, which we have heard about in some detail this evening, and then annual self-assessment. And again, there were some elements that we have identified as needing further work as part of that item. And further review of budget setting, because that will always be a continuous process. We did make some changes in year in terms of the monitoring, so we have set out gross income and expenditure, because I think otherwise it's very easy to underestimate the spending power of the council. And as Councillor Johnson pointed out, even taking out those statutory adjustments, the gross expenditure of the council is significant. So that has been implemented. I think if you look at the kind of in-year monitoring and the out-term position, there's definitely room for improvement in terms of our projection of what our gross expenditure in year, but that will very much be a process. But you know, it's something that we're looking to continue to refine, and we're feeding in a budget monitoring position starting this month on a monthly basis into SLT, so we can take action quicker where we're seeing emerging overspends as well. In terms of the action plan for improvement in 26-27, capital planning, which sits very nicely alongside the Audit Wales study. So in terms of ensuring that the planning is informed by up-to-date condition surveys, and providing training to councillor to drive more informed decision making. So the target date for that is the 31st of March 2027. And we're planning to do that from within our existing resources. We've identified the delivering good governance sit for solace framework. So reflecting on those first iterations of the annual self-assessment, and reviewing the operation of the Council's Scrutiny Committee arrangements, again tying in with that Audit Wales recommendation. So aiming to do that by September 2026, although I suppose there might be some ongoing elements that we'd need to pick up. And again, both elements of that from within existing resources. In terms of understanding our prospects for financial sustainability, so we've implemented a multidisciplinary approach to bring about closer working across schools finance, school improvement and HR. So that is very much in place. And we have highlighted that we may need additional one-off resource from council reserves, but to my knowledge that hasn't been required as yet. In terms of the 26-27 reserve and drawdowns from reserves, so that's, I said June, I'm always got there, July. From July, we'll be looking at monthly drawdowns from SLT. So the first of those will be going this week with requests to have drawdowns for revenue. And that's to make sure that we've got sign off of those planned use of reserves as well, because obviously the council's priorities and financial position is ever changing. So slightly missed that target it felt achievable at the time. And then also around the way that we manage our capital programme, again tying in with those Audit Wales recommendations. Now we have a particularly large capital programme in 26-27. It's around 170 million. So in Q1 we've been undertaking a review of deliverability of those schemes. So understanding whether we can deliver them within the budget that we have available, within the profile, so within the timescale that we've set out, we'll deliver that scheme in, and also within the existing capacity of the council. And I think that was highlighted in the Audit Wales report. The outcome of that will be going to SLT this week. We'll also be reviewing our capital bid forms for 27-28 to consider value for money. And I think if you look at the detail of the internal audit report as well, it makes some points around some additional improvements we can make around business cases. So the project toolkit is currently being updated, and that will be a really helpful resource for people. But also there's we perhaps, where we've got grant funding, we do great business cases, but perhaps for internally funded schemes, we need to be more rigorous in terms of that business case process, but also perhaps have a slightly less lengthy capital bid form and capture more of that information as part of a formal business case. So we're doing a bit of a reset of that for 27-28, also setting out the outcomes and trying to more successfully measure value for money, and obviously more importantly reflecting back at that at the end of the delivery of the programme. Now we've set a target of 30th of June for that, but I think that is referring to that Q1 piece of work, but actually we're finalising that at the moment, so we slightly missed that, and that capital bid element will be, we need to take a bit longer. That'll be as part of the 27-28 budget setting. So I've rambled on slightly about the action plans, but happy to take any questions or comments on the report.
Thank you, Gemma, for that again. Are there any questions? No? Any comments? No, I think the only comments I make is obviously we're going to need to pick up matters we discussed in the previous report in this report. Certainly in regards to the budget monitoring group, the self-assessment and budget setting, directed self-assessment of budget monitoring. So there's a bit of an overlap in reality, but and as long as obviously you've raised those, as long as you're happy for them to be picked up here as well. So if there is anything else, the recommendation I think is that we note the statement on compliance with the Financial Management Code and the contents of the review set out in Appendix 1, and request that the following comments be noted by Cabinet, and that's the issues surrounding the budget monitoring group and the Directorate self-assessment and the Directorate budget setting. Does that pick up?
Yeah, can I just ask if notice the right word there? Because obviously we're referencing a recommendation we've already made in a separate report. I just checked that notes probably a fair thing to put. I'm just very aware of the action words used can very much change what Cabinet do with the recommendation.
Yeah, you want to be a bit more direct, I suppose, in terms of action or enact and.
Well, we can note this report, can't we, and what's been discussed is, and it's not a suggestion that we, as you said, we request the Cabinet consider. Yeah,
I think that's adequate because it comes under this separately. They're separate. So if we request they consider it upon both the two items, I think that very much covers our basis as to what we're requesting.
This is a separate item, and I apologise. My brain's getting haggled now. It's 2.5 hours in, and you know, I'm glad we haven't got about another 10 items on, because people know I expect my view is that we could finish the meeting in 3 hours and that's it, and then we'd adjourn it. Matt.
I think these actions actually sit better in this report than in the previous one. This report is going on to, naturally does go on to Cabinet, and we can ask Cabinet to consider those points.
Well, I hope the other one goes on to Cabinet because that's what it says. Oh. Okay, but there's nothing wrong in referencing them in both the recommendations that we make. Okay, so on that note, someone prepared to move, please. Thank you. Ewan, can I have a second? Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Anyone against? No, thank you very much. Andrew, you've got 25 minutes now. Item 12 of the report is the Governance and Audit Committee Decision and Action Tracker.
Sorry, Chair, this would be me. This is something I prepare for an ornament.
Apologies.
It's okay, it's okay. Listen to my thunder. All right. So, obviously, we had an update in last meeting in June. It's only a few weeks ago. There's not much to report since that meeting, unfortunately, Chair. I'm still waiting for the response in terms of the redacted report around Aberthaw. And other than that, Chair, most of the actions are then there's a few references to Cabinet for this week. So we're pretty much in limbo from the last meeting. So if there's any.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that, Gareth. In regards to the unredacted report in regards to Aberthaw Power Station, might I suggest that the Chief Executive of the Cardiff Corporate Joint Committee be advised that they're still subject to Freedom of Information Act request. However, whatever guise we put it in, they have 20 working days in which to produce it. If they haven't, then we'll consider referring it to the ICO. Thank you. Okay, the recommendation is that we note the contents of the report and obviously you pick up the comments I just made. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you. Seconded. Thank you. Anyone against? No, thank you. Item 13, the annual corporate fraud report 25-26. Joan, you've waited so long.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so this is our annual report to provide members of this committee with details of the actions undertaken in respect of the counter-fraud during 25-26, including an update on the National Fraud Initiative exercise. As you know, one of the core functions of effective governance and audit committee is to consider the effectiveness of the council's risk management arrangements, the control environment and associated anti-fraud and corruption arrangements. So if I very briefly take you to the actual report itself at Appendix A, which is at page 450 of your pack. And I'd just like to draw your attention to Table 1 that identifies the recoverable savings that were made during 25-26 and the categories that they were made under. This goes into more detail throughout the report, but in total £151,835 of recoverable savings was identified. That was across NFI work and as well as fraud savings, which again I'll touch on in a minute. So Section 2 of the report outlines the proactive work that's been undertaken during the year. This all sits around the corporate fraud strategy and framework, which underpins the Council's commitment to prevent all forms of fraud, bribery and corruption. Annex 1 shows all the steps that we've identified to support continual improvement. And within Section 2 of the report, it gives an update to committee of the actions that were taken during 25-26. So for the fraud risk register, the register was updated during August 25, and this provides a robust tool for identifying fraud risks and the actions required to mitigate these by ensuring the council's resources are targeted correctly. As you all know, there are several policies in place. None were due for review this year. That'll be next year. So they were as you've seen previously in this committee. Training and fraud awareness that continued during 25-26. The council's internal intranet page has been updated as well as the external web pages. During the past year, fraud alerts and newsletters have been shared with relevant staff to further raise awareness. In addition, the corporate fraud officer continues to deliver fraud awareness sessions. This is usually targeted at staff employed within the business areas more susceptible to fraud. During 25-26, a total of 71 staff members attended fraud awareness training, and these sessions will continue to run during 26-27. In addition, the fraud prevention e-learning module was launched at the beginning of 25, and a total of 440 staff members have successfully completed this prevention training during 25-26. Section 3 of the report talks about the National Fraud Initiative, which is a biennial data matching exercise managed by the UK Cabinet Office and run by Audit Wales in Wales. As you can see, the data for the biannual NFI data matching was extracted and forwarded to NFI in October 24. So we're coming to the end of those data matches, and a new match will be extracted towards the end of this year. Table 2 in your report at 3.4 shows that from the NFI matches, a total of 203 fraud or errors have been identified. This equates to a recoverable amount of £112,400. The final column there shows Cabinet Office projected savings. They're notional figures. So although I've put them in because that's what Audit Wales will report on, it's the recoverable figure that is more relevant, and that's the £112,400. And I've also put in there the types of matches that have generated those recoverable savings. In addition to the data matches, the NFI data matches, we also get an annual single person discount exercise match to the which matches the single person discount against the council tax system. There was 9,000 households were identified for review during 25-26, and from the review, not all those were done due to work constraints, etc., but 34 frauds and errors have been identified from the high-risk matches that were looked at, which generated a further £6,394 of recoverable savings. Just a point to note, although this is an annual data matching exercise, the council has actually commence the employment of a company specialising in the services relating to single person discount claims and fraud detection. So it's too early to predict what the savings are through this company and then the impact that will have on the data matching. Over time, that will sort itself out, and we are going to try and bring you figures next year in relation to those. Section 4 is the counter fraud and corruption work that's undertaken, and that's with us in internal audit together with a corporate fraud officer. As you know, suspected fraud allegations can be generated in several ways, and as Vicky presented earlier, by whistleblowing or complaints, or by the speak out service. In addition, managers can raise concerns to us, or we identify things during internal audit reviews. Table 4 there shows that there were two internal fact-finding exercises that were undertaken, and the outcome of those led to disciplinary action and dismissal. Counter fraud reduction, council tax reduction fraud is the element of fraud which our corporate fraud officer continues to investigate. Things changed in 2015 when the responsibility to provide investigations was transferred to the DWP. However, as far as council tax is concerned, all associated funding was devolved to the council to allocate, and therefore any fraud that we identify we can recover using our fraud enforcement policy, and then generate more council savings back to the council. So during 25-26, 81 referrals were received relating to individuals being in receipt of benefit that they may not be entitled to, and this increased from 55 in 24-25. 29 of these referrals were forwarded to the DWP because of the implication of the DWP benefits, such as universal credit, job seekers allowance, etc. Table 6 shows committee the type of allegations that we received during 25-26, and you can see that in Table 7, a total of 52 benefit referral cases were closed, and the closure categories are detailed there. So you can see from that a total of 27 weren't investigated due to lack of information or evidence. 15 were investigated but were closed, no evidence of fraud, but 10 were closed as fraud proven. These 10, if I take you to Table 8, have generated further recoverable funds to the Vale of Glamorgan Council of £33,040, and also there's been an element identified as recoverable by the DWP of 58,000. So many of these cases are joint working, because most claimants do tend to have other benefits as well as council tax reduction. As I alluded to, due to the council's fraud enforcement policy, the council's sanction panel sit to determine appropriate sanctions in regard to the cases that have been closed with CTR. There's sanctions available: a prosecution, financial penalty, and fines. Table 9 shows that the successful sanctions in 25-26 were for financial penalties. So by definition, we can then administer a penalty as well as recover the fraud, which we've done. So that generated an additional £2,048. The final section, section 5, just outlines the joint working and partnerships that we as a council work with. So it's the police, the DWP, as I've already said. There's a Welsh Chief Auditors group, as well as a local authority fraud investigators group that meets quite regularly and share expertise. And finally, our corporate fraud officer is reported, as I said, by ourselves in the Regional Internal Audit Service, and he also undertakes the mentoring of the fraud officer in Merthyr, as well as works very closely with the Bridgend Council's fraud team. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Joan. A comprehensive report again, setting out the work of the team, which again, to be congratulated really. So if you could pass on our thanks. Any questions? Matthew.
Thanks, Joan. Not necessarily related to the report itself, but I guess there's been a lot of reports or publicity in the last 12-18 months about transformative nature of AI in fraud risks. I'm just interested how you are thinking about that in the context of it being an emerging or arguably a present risk in terms of fraud.
Thank you for the thank you for the question. Obviously, it is an emerging risk. It is considered on the fraud risk register as well as in our audit planning. It's early days, and it's obviously considered. There's no specifics I can really share with you at the moment, but it is considered, and we are working on it.
And just to add to that, obviously we link in with the IIA as well. So any issues that come through from professional bodies in relation to fraud awareness, we make sure the team's aware of those, and we build those into our planning, like Joan says.
It's an interesting question, Matthew. Someone raised exactly the same question in Bridgend last week when they considered their annual fraud report. And the fraud officer said that he'd not experienced any to date. But obviously mindful of potential. So it's interesting, some of his questions, they sort of bounce around, but that was raised specifically as a real risk now moving forward. Any other questions? I've just got a quick question in regards to blue badges. Obviously in table 2 it says blue badge to deceased person, fraud and errors 174. How does the cabinet correlate that there's a projected saving of £138,000 there for blue badge misuse or use? And the second question is, Joan, what enforcement action has been taken by the council by way of on-street action by wardens, etc., to look at blue badges? Because again, I raised it in a different committee earlier. Some poor person was deceased. They cleared all their bits and pieces out of their property, which landed up in a charity shop. And the charity shop was selling the blue badge. So the issue is, it's okay saying it'll be cancelled, but if no one's enforcing that, then for £1, it was good value for money. You know, they could be misused till a duration. So I'm just wondering whether there's any physical enforcement taking place of blue badges.
Thank you for the question. As far as the calculation of the financial saving, the amount is 794 per blue badge cancelled is the amount that the Audit Wales work on to give that notional saving. That is to reflect the lost parking and congestion charging. So obviously, if you're in London or where the congestion, that inflates it. So this is an average of £794, which then it covers that. It covers the costs of the badge and they say in the prevention of fraud and the duration for which the fraudulent use of the blue badge may continue undetected. So that's how they come up to the £794 per blue badge. As far as the Vale of Glamorgan Council is concerned, on the matching exercise, they do all the matches, they do cancel the badges as appropriate, but as far as I'm aware yet, there's been no enforcement action taken, unlike other local authorities.
Perhaps that could be something could be looked at by their parking wardens. You know, the challenges to the blue badge. I know it's a bit of a thorny issue, but I don't know how many blue badges the Vale's issued. But just food for thought, that's all I mention it. Any other questions? Any comments? Okay, go to the recommendation quickly. The recommendation is, that we note the contents of the report, the measures that are in place and the work being undertaken to prevent and detect fraud and error. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you. Seconded. Thank you very much. Anyone against? No, thank you. Last item, item 14, the forward work programme. Joan?
Thank you, Chair. This is your standard report that itemises the items on the forward work programme that is due to come to committee at the next meeting, which is the 21st of September. Currently, there's 10 that are listed within 4.2 of the report, but obviously they can be amended as appropriate. I'd just like to draw attention to a typo that is in the recommendation. That date is incorrect. It should be the 21st of September 2026, the next meeting. Apologies for that.
That's okay. Any comments? Any questions? No. Any comments? No. Someone prepared to move the recommendation? Thank you, that we noted. Thank you. Seconded, yes. Anyone objecting? No. The only thing I would say is, can we just be mindful that when we have a big agenda about the amount of time it takes, and I am mindful, I haven't allowed a comfort break for people, which I think, you know, maybe they don't do it in the Vale. I'm not sure, but most councils ask me to have a comfort break for about 10 minutes so they can ease springs, as we say in the RAF. Okay, thank you very much, Ms Johnson. Okay, item 15, there are no other urgent items. There are no part 2. Can I firstly thank everyone for their contribution this evening? It's been, you know, a very interesting and valuable committee again. Thank you for the discussion, the debate and the recommendations. And everyone have a safe journey home. And I now close the meeting. Thank you very much. And thank you to the translator. I forget you're up in your little box up there. Thank you very much for what you do.